people can continue to join. And I'm just going to start with a privacy announcement. We are recording this. We're only going to record the main part of the sort of presentation, let's call it, and when we get to the Q&A, I think it will continue recording, but we're going to cut that out. We obviously want to record the main part because we want to be able to share this with people. We've had lots of requests from people who haven't been able to find the time this morning to join us live, but they do want to, they're very interested and want to see this. So we are recording it for that purpose. What I'd just like to say from a privacy point of view, obviously this is a nice, small and hopefully intimate session. So the panelists and we can see the names of people who are joining, but that won't be visible on the recording. So from the point of view of the recording, nobody other than the presenters are identifiable on this. And like I say, when we get onto the Q&A, we won't be keeping that part of the recording either. So I just wanted to make sure that was really clear before we started. So of course, please do ask a question if there's any concerns around anything I've just said. So anyway, listen, on to the fun part. So welcome everybody to this morning's session on how to develop a data strategy. And in a moment, I'm going to introduce my guests from Art Fund and Ovarian Cancer Action. Just want to really just say a few words before we start, and I promise I'll keep it brief. I really just want to introduce Qantas for those who don't know us, and I want to give you a very sort of quick overview of what we're seeing, and in particular what we're seeing from our perspective in terms of data and data strategies, because there's quite a lot going on out there at the moment. Just move my slides on. Qantas, if you haven't heard about us, then really quite straightforward. We're a team of consultants, and we have what we describe real world experience. So all of the consultants at Qantas, we've worked with organizations that we now support and work with. So we work with charities, membership organizations, higher education institutes to really help them develop data, digital technology strategies and design and implement solutions. And generally those, the emphasis and focus is always around increasing customer or member, supporter, beneficiary, student experience, and at the same time increasing operational efficiency. And I want to quickly talk about what we're seeing when it comes to data strategies, because like I say, there's quite a lot going on. And I love this quote, and I generally start with this quote. And I know a few people looking at the attendees, I know a few people have seen this before, and it always creates a wry smile. You know, if we have data, let's look at data, and if we have opinions, let's go with mine. And James Barksdale was a US entrepreneur. And like I say, it always creates a bit of a wry smile and resonates because most people are thinking, yep, you got us. That's kind of where we are right now, despite our best intentions. So, and I think data has been a pretty hot topic from my perspective since 2018 and GDPR coming in, where most organizations realize that we just haven't really been managing data as well as we should be. And beyond the sort of compliance angle, you know, we've been talking very recently in the last few years to organizations that are thinking about changing their systems, but quite rightly they're beginning to think, yeah, but we need to sort our data out first. Data is the important bit, isn't it? And you know, they're quite often asking questions is, we don't even know, you know, what data we've got and where it is, and if we do know where it is, we can't really access it. And even if we can access it, do we really understand the strategic importance of that data in terms of the value it could provide to our stakeholders and to ourselves as an organization to improve what we do and how we do it. And equally, we talked to a number of organizations that have gone through systems changes. There's a really interesting insight on this one actually, which is that the organizations have gone through a systems change and actually data has become less accessible as a result of that, because you know what in the world before they changed their systems, generally speaking, people had workarounds, right? I also known as spreadsheets, or they knew the person in that department who produced the report they really liked on a regular basis. They knew how to get that. So, and with a systems change overnight, that rug has been pulled out from a lot of people, under a lot of people's feet, and it's created this sort of, after the event of systems change, this kind of consternation that actually we're further back rather than further forward than we wanted to be. So either way, what I've really noticed is when it comes to data, most organizations don't really know where to start, and at a senior level really do find it hard to even have a conversation, a consistent and serious conversation about data. And that is generally where we try and start. And I've just got one more slide, which I'll go through this really quickly, which is, we generally follow a sort of 5-step approach. And some of you may have seen or caught sight of the paper I produced on this. So I'd refer you to that if you want to go into this in any more detail. But the first 2 steps are exactly what I was just mentioning. Let's have a conversation about data. Let's start with, what is that strategic role of data, i.e. where are you trying to get to as an organization, step 1. And then really importantly, do we really understand where we are now against a range of dimensions, from our technology to our skills to our governance and leadership and culture and processes? Do we really understand where we are right now? So step 1 and 2 is kind of where do we want to get to and where are we right now? And then step 3 and 4 is really saying, step 3, what's stopping us getting there? What are the key barriers to delivering that data vision and developing a strategic data capability? And step 4 is therefore the flip side of that. What are the enablers? How do we actually, what do we need to put in place? What do we need to change? And then step 5, obviously, how do you actually deliver those changes in a strategic approach lined up to the rest of the organization? Obviously, this doesn't happen in isolation. There's other things going on. So making sure how that's all ties together. That's all I'm going to say on that, because I know you've all come not to listen to me. You've come to listen to my friends and colleagues, Yvonne Hanson-Mills from the Art Funds and Nick Wright from Ovarian Cancer Action. So with that in mind, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing so we can see each other. I'm just going to make sure I do that properly. And we're going to start with, I'm going to kick this off with the first question, which is really, and I'm going to start with yourself, Yvonne, and that's why, what got you to the point where you realized you needed to develop a data strategy? And maybe just tell us a bit about the sort of background and issues and challenges, please.
Yeah, sure. So as sort of Rob has sort of introduced me as, I'm in an interim position as head of tech at the Art Fund. And when I joined, I think one of the first gaps that I noticed was the lack of a data function within the organization. And what was actually really apparent was the level of frustration across the organization, but particularly in the senior management sort of team, with I think some of the things that Rob said about sort of accessibility of data. They had implemented a new system, which had been in place for a couple of years, but there was frustration that the general view was that data was less accessible, and also the fact that the organization isn't really sort of using data for making key decisions. So that was a key element. And that's where we sort of made the decision that what was required as a data strategy. And also to ensure that we have that, one of the things I was quite keen on was to ensure that we had that function in place to facilitate that.
Thanks, Yvonne. Nick, how about you?
Yeah, so I'm just to say as well, so my position is head of comms and marketing at OCA. I'm Mac cover as well, so also that situation. So yeah, where we were at was basically we were kind of ready to embark on a new 5-year strategy. And kind of the real kind of background was that it was around kind of supercharged fundraising to make faster progress, to make ovarian cancer a survivable disease. And kind of, as obviously Rob and Yvonne have both said, kind of at the core of that really was, using data and identifying data and evidence as a critical enabler to deliver that strategy. So really, did we understand how to use it in practice, and also where we were now really in terms of, where we were at that point in time, where we need to get to in order to, be able to supercharge fundraising. Because fundamentally, in order to do that, people and taking people on journeys is massively important. And so, one isn't possible without the other. So for us, it was a kind of a real, it was impossible to do this, to supercharge fundraising without kind of really focusing on data and understanding, what our data was and all the kind of things that Rob mentioned in terms of how we access it and how we collect it and what we're allowed to do and the journeys we want to take people on and the degrees of sophistication was really vital. So from that, a kind of data strategy and a roadmap was needed to kind of say, well, how does this can help us achieve our strategy, basically? And from that as well, we'd already identified a few kind of issues and kind of anecdotal evidence in terms of things that we thought, okay, this needs to be looked at. And so kind of the kind of melting pot came together in terms of all those things, but really it was the strategy that kind of drove it, because without kind of real grunt work on data, it was never going to be possible.
We'll go into a bit more detail on the what you did to develop the strategy in a second. You obviously decided you needed help in developing that. I just wondered if you could just tell us a bit about that. Is it something you had to go doing yourselves, or but beforehand, or what were you looking for when sort of seeking help to do this?
So yeah, I'll start.
Yeah.
We, as I mentioned, identified the need for a data function in the organization, and what we thought we needed was a clear strategy, and I felt that I didn't have the capacity to do that, and B, it's not something that I'd actually done myself. So I felt that in order to get this sort of embedded and actually have sort of an expert coming and help us develop it, I think that I felt that would put us in a much better position, because it's also really useful to have a fresh sort of pair of eyes to come in and actually evaluate our environment and help us develop that strategy. So that's what led us to sort of go down that route and identify that need. That's.
I can't remember if for yourselves, Yvonne. I mean, a number of organisations I've spoken to have said, we've tried this before, we've done a data strategy before, but never got anywhere. I can't remember with yourselves if that was the case.
I believe there were some attempts prior to my joining in various areas to actually try and put something together, but it sort of fell to the wayside for various reasons, one being lack of capacity, and I think the other also lack of capability, I would say. So I mean, there was sort of easy buy-in to the sort of proposal to get external sort of support to do that.
Yeah, Nick, how about yourself?
Yeah, it's a very similar story. Obviously, we have one data person in the team, a data and processes manager, who's great, but obviously that's probably far more about the business as usual and kind of keeping things moving, which is obviously you have to keep doing whilst doing kind of work like this. But what we did have was really kind of the ambition and the commitment at a kind of senior management level to kind of really highlight that this is a real priority in order for us to achieve our strategy, and similar to with you, Yvonne, as well, that we had probably done a few things before to try and start these things up. It wasn't the first time this had been kind of looked at, but I think it hadn't been given the priority and it hadn't been given the kind of urgency and the real kind of like foundations to build from for a strategy. So that's where we kind of got in touch with the Qantas and kind of took it forward in a bigger way, because we wanted to make sure that if we're going to do it, we're going to do it properly, and we have to kind of make systemic change.
Mm-hmm.
And then, Yvonne, do you want to talk us through the actual project itself? What were the, from your perspective, the approach that you followed, and really, what did you find most useful? What sticks out as the most useful activities? And I guess following on from that, the sort of key sort of insights.
Yeah, okay. So in terms of getting you guys on board, we went through a process, sort of kind of went out to tender, and Qantas came up on top, in terms of cost effectiveness and the your approach. So I think that's what sort of sold it for us in terms of you as an organization, and I think for me the approach that you took was great in terms of the involving staff across the organization, so at different levels. That was really a real engaging process. We put a project team together with different so people from different areas. So there was representation across the board. And from my perspective, I think the data use cases were the most sort of effective way of surfacing some of the challenges and sort of identifying the sort of priorities that priority areas that we needed addressing. And I also think that the engagement with the senior management team was great, as was the data maturity sort of survey that we undertook. I think that surfaced a lot and gave us a good indication of where we stood, in terms of our data maturity and also where we want to get to. So I think it gave it some real focus in terms of the journey that we were embarking on.
And I always like to feel that, as I said in my intro, that it's sometimes hard to talk about data. Not everyone talks about it every day and may not even have the right words or language to do that. And I mean, I get a couple of observations working with the Art Fund. I mean, A was just a huge enthusiasm for everyone. It was fantastic. I mean, similar with OCA as well, I should quickly say, but, really enthusiastic to have this conversation. And I'm just wondering, I think we did get to a point where we had that language. We were able to, at the senior team level as well, talk about data and do that in a strategic way, rather than just focusing on all the problems and the things we can't achieve, and that's a problem. But we were having a very sort of progressive and strategic conversation, I felt. And
absolutely. And I think very much like Nick was saying, we are also in that process of developing a 5-year sort of strategy. So I think the timing was really sort of right in terms of surfacing the data strategy, because it ties in quite nicely to the strategy. And I think that there is that even more of an awareness of the pivotal sort of role that data will play in that, both now and in the years to come. So
and we came up with some fresh ideas, I think, as well, which is quite exciting in terms of that strategic role of data.
That's
I think there were some obvious things, but then there was some things that really came up during the project. And
absolutely. And I think the idea of an innovation hub, I think, was really a really exciting concept that people have really latched on to. So it's sort of woven its way into the strategy in sort of various areas, which I think is fantastic.
I'm going to jump over to Nick. I may come back and just ask a bit more about the data use cases actually in a second to move on. But Nick, do you want to? Similar question really, just the project from your perspective. I know we're going back almost a year now, but how did the project go from your perspective, and any sort of key sort of highlights, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was really good. I think the starting point for me was more about really understanding kind of our specific needs as an organisation, because obviously that and the resources that we're up against in terms of and also the capabilities, the skills that the team have. I think that was really, really important, just to kind of understand your limitations, but also kind of your potential. I think the exercise we did right at the start in terms of kind of really getting people's consensus around kind of, okay, where are we from a point of view in terms of our skills, our technology, our understanding, our governance, etc. But also kind of putting in the context of where can we get to, especially in an 18-month time frame, because the ambition for everything should be 5 stars, but that's also not possible or realistic, I suppose, should I say, in a certain time frame. So actually it's like, well, where do we need to be? And where can we get to within that time frame? I think that's really good to kind of have that initial expectation setting. And I think then it was just good to kind of be able to diagnose some of the issues that people had highlighted. People would come at it from different angles in terms of I can't do this, or how do I do that and stuff. And actually what you'd find, I suppose, is they're being analysed from 5 different positions, and actually when you kind of get to the root of it, you go, oh, this is the issue here. And so being able to actually just kind of surface those and kind of put them into a group that says, okay, the problem is actually this. That's really great for people to go, okay, now I can see a solution. I can see a kind of a sunset that we're aiming towards. And so for me, that was, especially as a new person joining, you kind of knew what you're up against, as opposed to it just feeling like there's lots of different things you need to fix, and what's the process, what's the order of getting to them.
Yeah, that's really interesting, you mentioning that strategic conversation at the beginning as well, because it was very right. I mean, both projects. I mean, for yourself, Nick, it was Kerry, your chief executive, was saying, we can't, we've got to be realistic here. We've got to have a realistic time frame, and we can't be 5 stars at everything. We've got to focus on what is most strategically important for us and for the OCA. So it was really making sure there was that pragmatic and realistic perspective as well on what can be achieved. And we'll come back to that thought in a minute, because obviously the strategy was signed off last summer, and obviously a bit of time has passed since then. It'd be really interesting to sort of find out where you've got to now. And I think, Yvonne, for yourself, it was very similar, wasn't it? I remember for the Art Fund, it was your marketing director Carolyn who was kind of saying almost the same thing. Look, where do we want to be the most, let's say, mature as an organization? Which dimensions, is it about data quality? Is it about the sort of the way we sort of the governance side, or the leadership, or even the technology part? Because we can't be excellent everywhere. And there was a real pivotal moment near the beginning, I think, where there was that that really fundamental conversation about strategically where are we now and where are we trying to get to. And that framed the rest of the project, I think, in a really fundamentally important way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I just wonder, I was going to come back and just ask about the data use cases, because you mentioned those. I mean, they are part of the methodology we followed was to identify at the start what is that strategic role of data, and then from that identify these things we're calling data use cases. Obviously a use case is how you use something. A data use case is how do you want to use data as an organization. And then on that, in the sort of in our methodology, that's those workshops where we're saying, and what's stopping you doing that? I'm just wondering if there was any particular one of those workshops that because we looked at using data to reconcile our income, using data to answer everyday reporting and analysis needs, using data to innovate. There were a number of different things that we sort of focused on. I just wondered if any of them sort of stuck out in any of the workshops we went through, because some of them were quite fun, I think.
I'd agree with that. I think so. One of the bugbears in our organization is the income reconciliation sort of side of things, and I think that was sort of one of the ones that sort of piqued a lot of people's interest, because there's this huge frustration. And I think you touched on in your intro this sort of area of operational efficiency, and I think that's sort of a key impediment sort of in our organization specifically, that inability to reconcile the income. And so that, I think, use case for me, the workshop was really revealing. We went through the steps to sort of understand what the frustrations were, and I think from what for me was interesting is the finance team and the sort of marketing team coming together and actually discussing the sort of issues from both perspectives. So in a way, we got to a point where we're, if you like, singing off the same hymn sheet in terms of this is what our challenges are and this is what we need to do to resolve. And I think that was something that we hadn't ever been surfaced, and I think was really a really useful exercise. So yeah.
You're reminding me. I mean, one of the common themes that kept on coming up again and again was we need a data model. We need this logical data model.
Absolutely,
it kept on coming up. Every workshop was, we need a logical data model, don't we? And that would solve everything. And obviously that was one of the recommendations that obviously came out in the strategy, and not the only one, I'd like to say. But it was quite amusing that a lot hinged around that need to actually, in a logical sense, be able to make sense of the data entities and the key attributes and the relationships between them, irrespective of the systems and where the data lived. And actually, a lot of the projects that I work on, it is a common element. Most organizations don't have that logical view of their data, and it certainly came out loud and clear how beneficial that would be if you had that at the Art Fund. And I think, Nick, it was very similar for yourselves, wasn't it?
I mean, all the things you're mentioning upon now actually are all very similar things that and I'm sure very similar things that everyone who's on the webinar today will encounter as well as stuff. I think it's pretty common, I suppose, and I think it's in a sense, sometimes a legacy of kind of like, I don't want to say neglect, that sounds a bit too extreme, but certainly kind of like it doesn't get the focus kind of it deserves and stuff. And I think, yeah, that's also great for when you're then kind of engaging, you know, internal stakeholders in, because they have to live through that struggle day by day and stuff, so they can kind of like see what the future holds. So yeah, we had a similar approach really, where it was all about, yeah, how supported journeys we're looking at, or consent was a big thing for us, and income reconciliation was definitely a big thing as well, and will continue to be. So yeah, it's common problems, but I think it's really good to just again have them surface so people can kind of see, okay, these are the key ones that if you kind of fix these and kind of really put some kind of time and effort on this, they can make a massive difference.
Another interesting insight for most of these projects that I work on, and these projects exactly the same, is that I think going in, when people think about data and the problems that they're experiencing, you know, don't know where it is. If we know what it is, can't access it. If we can access it, do we know how to use it? The natural inclination is always think, yeah, that's a technology problem. If we just had the right tools and technology, it will all be better, wouldn't it? What's really, really interesting on all of these, you know, both these projects, was that actually the findings, the conclusions, recommendations, it's a bit about technology as an enabler there, but it's not central to the data strategy, is it? You know, it's actually really interesting the degree to which the other elements, you know, the other enablers around having, you know, clear data policies and procedures, having clear, you know, governance around how we make decisions about what we can and what we can't do. How do we maximize the value of data? That has to sit within a governance framework. Obviously, skills and capacity of people and you know, processes around that as well is always going to be a, you know, a common aspect as well, as is, you know, the engagement of leadership into the conversation that sets the tone and builds the culture around valuing data. So I just, you know, I'm wondering for yourselves as well, because I know, you know, starting with yourself, you know, going into the project, there was some key questions around, do we have the right technology? And actually, yeah, there's some recommendations I think came out around technology, but it wasn't the main sort of recommendation, was it?
No, I think really at the heart of it was probably process as much as anything else, and not having those things really defined, that meant that without that kind of like rigidity, it just meant there was a lot of room for error, I suppose. And like any small organization as well and stuff, where, you know, you've had different people come into the role and kind of do it in different ways. Again, without that process there, without that documentation there, it then meant that, yeah, there was quite a high level of inconsistency. It was kind of from a kind of a breadcrumbs trail in terms of understanding, you know, the legacy of how something works on the database, for example, was quite difficult to figure out. And so they're quite, you know, fundamental things at the core that kind of like would build the foundation for everything else. And I do think that foundational bit is really the bit that I was really struck upon. You know, I think I used the example of many times with you, Rob, in terms of, you know, there were holes essentially in our foundations, which then meant that, you know, whether we were kind of bringing in data or looking at processes, you know, things were kind of slipping through those gaps, and it was then really hard to try and to build upon that. And so that was kind of where, for me, I think having that kind of that structure in place was going to be vital for us kind of having a chance for success.
Yeah, and then Yvonne, with yourselves, I mean, there had been a fairly significant investment in technology, right, before this, but where did that leave the organisation in terms of, you know, data accessibility and access and use? And
yeah, so I think your intro sort of made me smile slightly, because like you say, there's been a significant investment in technology over the past 3 years in the organization. And when I joined, the current situation is that there's a huge level of frustration, you know, at senior management sort of level, because they're not really seeing what they were expecting to be, you know, sort of benefits in terms of, and I think specifically around data and accessibility. And I think it really is as a result of some of the things Nick touched on, you know, sort of lack of process, the ownership, leadership, you know, so all those elements in terms of, you know, how you sort of manage the environment and, you know, the framework that the governance framework that's around it. So I think those are one of the elements that, you know, I'm trying to resolve in the organization, and I think that also sort of led into the sort of development of a data strategy. So there was clear recognition that these things need to be fixed, you know, in order for us to get to that point. But yeah, you're absolutely right. So, you know, that when I joined, a lot of the narrative was that, you know, nothing works. You know, we've spent a lot of money on our CRM system, and we can't, you know, we're further behind than we were before. So all the things that you were saying sort of really resonate.
Yeah, so, certainly, and I guess, you know, it is anecdotally, you know, it's easy at the start of a transformation program where maybe there's a big sort of technology change component within it. There's always at the start, you know, there's always high ambitions, let's say, and expectations around what could be delivered from this transformation program, in terms of, it could be in terms of experiences, it could be in terms of efficiency, and all of those things. What often happens, as we all know, technology, any change program involving a big, you know, technology change, often it gets tough quite quickly, and the project often does get reduced down to being a technology project, and we lose sight of you know, those ambitions at some point during the project. It's easy, there's an easy trap to fall into. So yeah, very, very interesting. So Nick, just jumping back to yourself then, just in terms of where you are now, because like I mentioned just a few moments ago, that delivered the strategy, approved it last summer, and time's moved on. So maybe you could just sort of update us on sort of what progress you've made, and then, you know, move into what you've learned, and any tips for organizations embarking on this. So Nick, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think so. In terms of the kind of progress you've made, I think the big ones, probably, we brought in a new kind of data person, a data and insight manager, who is on the webinar today, is one of the viewers. And that was really important, just in terms of having that kind of expertise, that kind of person who could really focus on this, you know, outside of our data person doing kind of day-to-day things. And then we set up initial kind of governance about, well, how are we going to deliver this project? You know, what resource do we need, et cetera, et cetera. And I think we probably spent many months scoping it, because I think my big, I suppose, learning / message from this is, like, it's hard, which is not an unsurprising thing to say. But, you know, when you look at the kind of like the size of it, and I do find it's a bit of an iceberg project sometimes, you know, where you realize that the more you delve into it, the more you uncover, and the kind of the deeper it is. I think it's sometimes can be tempting to run before you can walk, and actually you realize there are kind of like big building blocks you kind of need to move around. And you're asking a lot from staff in terms of, there's a massive cultural change in terms of, you know, how they view data and their day-to-day working practices, but also how you fit that in with your business as usual. That is really, really difficult, because it's asking some serious changes. So I think, yeah, really the last probably 6 months, I would say, have been around scoping, really making sure that, okay, how have we got the resource? How have we got the kind of the capabilities internally? How do we do this, you know, with the team we have, and with the kind of the ways of working that we have, to really kind of ensure success? And then being really clear about, yeah, what are the priorities? What are the biggest things we want to focus on initially? Because there were lots of things that came out of the roadmap that are all completely valid and really important things to focus on, but there has to be an order to it, because we don't have an endless supply of money and resource to throw at it. So I think really kind of focusing on that, making sure that we can do this right, has been probably the learnings we've had, and that it is hard, and it's okay to admit it's hard.
Yeah. Yvonne?
Well, very similar. It is hard. So I think from my perspective, as I mentioned earlier on, we didn't have a data function in our organization. So one of the things I was keen to see happen was to have that sort of role in place to sort of lead on the delivery of the strategy. That hasn't quite gone to plan. So I actually started the recruitment process, and Rob, you know, sort of helped with the fast, you know, developing the JD. But it was really difficult. So we really struggled to find the right person. And I think for me, it was key. We gained a lot of momentum, you know, through the project. You know, it was, like I said, it was a very collaborative effort, and everyone was engaged, and there was a lot of enthusiasm, as Rob mentioned. So I was quite keen that we don't lose that momentum. And so I wanted to get someone in, you know, sort of really soon after the end of the project, but that hadn't quite worked as I planned. I mean, we are making progress now. I now have a junior data person in place. And I am very optimistic that I will soon have a head of data role in place, because I think it's key to have the right person who can move that forward. So that's one of my key learnings. What I didn't want to do was start on implementing some of the items in the roadmap, as much as, you know, I was keen to see that happen, because my worry was that we'd start and then, you know, because of sort of business as usual activities, they'll fall by the wayside and we'll lose that momentum and the goodwill that we have sort of engendered. And you know, I think also what's really key is I see this as a cultural shift as well. So I think that it's really key to have the right person, the right resource in place to sort of take us on that journey. So yeah.
Having just gone through this recruitment, and maybe Nick, it'd be interesting to ask, you know, from yourself too, but Yvonne first, I mean, gone through this recruitment, would it be easy to conclude there's a skills shortage out there?
I would say yes. So what we've had to do, we sort of initially went out for a data and insight manager, and there's a skills shortage. What we were finding was most of the applicants were sort of, data managers who had implemented CRM systems, but they lacked that strategic focus that we were looking for. So, and we wanted to get it right. So, you know, that's why it was such a struggle. So I found that sort of having to sort of review that role and make it ahead of data seems to have worked. And obviously the salary levels, we've had to sort of revisit the budget for that. And I think that's paying off, because getting better quality candidates come through the door.
Yeah. Any Nick, anything to add on that? You know, you went through the recruitment process as well, and I mean, anything to add to that?
Yeah, no, I think it's pretty similar. I think the key as well, especially at a small organization and stuff, like it's a really broad, deep role.
Yeah.
That, you know, really covers such a wide gambit of kind of like data, insight, project management, you know, kind of strategic thinking. And so that naturally, you know, is always going to be, I think, a tough role to recruit for, because you're kind of asking for a lot. And that's, I guess, that kind of fits into the idea of, you know, the size of the project and that kind of commitment from the organization in terms of, you know, it can't, you know, no one person coming in is going to like fix everything for you and kind of make everything happen. It's got to be a very systemic change, of which also this, you know, one person could do a lot of the thinking, a lot of the driving, then you're going to need some other people to kind of do a lot of the grunt work in much cases. So I think it was an example of how can you, you know, this is as a part of a kind of a big wheel of things that need to turn. And yeah, it is difficult. And I think it's something we're still kind of, you know, grappling with all the time, because it is a constant learning curve, both for our new data insight manager, but also for the organization.
And like you described, you know, armed with the strategy and the roadmap last summer, you know, the first task really, and I guess it'd be fair to say, you know, reflecting on what you were saying just now, and, you know, we fell into the trap potentially of getting really overexcited and going, right, let's do everything all at once, and then quickly realizing that everything you looked at was actually bigger than you first imagined. And that's what I think I've heard you say, you know, and it's so this period of scoping, you know, has taken a while, but it's been a really important one, because I think it's fair to say, you know, if you reread the strategy and the roadmap now, it's still the right strategy, right? It's just a better understanding 6 months on and what it really takes to deliver it.
Yeah, and it's the gamble I think Yvonne mentioned before about, you know, it's that bit where you do all the kind of, you know, the workshops, and you kind of get people kind of G'd up and they can kind of see, you know, the future a little bit, and obviously then people want it now. But then obviously it's then getting the structures, the people in place, the kind of the right, creating that kind of right kind of clear path for things to happen and stuff. And so it's that balance between, you don't want to lose momentum, but at the same time you don't want to rush into things and realize you're kind of, okay, we're lost a little bit in the weeds because there's so much stuff to do. And I think we probably ended up a little bit down that road, purely because there were immediate opportunities you could see. But I do think, yeah, we've spent a lot of time kind of really re-scoping things and just kind of re-evaluating, well, how are we doing this, and have we got the right governance in place, and, you know, is this working for everybody, and being very honest with people internally about how are we going to do this to make sure that we're all kind of on the same page.
Yeah, alongside the day job. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. We're going to move to Q&A in a second. So if you're watching this, I think so Krista's pressed the